All right, welcome back. This is COVID-19 video series. Video series from SYS 101. This will be the 8th iteration. Continuing on writing good requirements. And so we left off yesterday with just kind of an overview of a review of what quality is. We talked about Crosby's 4 absolutes, focusing primarily on the definition of quality as conformance requirements, and talked a little bit about that. We talked about the iterative design process and how that works. We actually had a flow chart that talked about the two different components of the design process, where we have the definition, which is where we're asking the customer, we're trying to clarify what exactly it is that the customer is looking for. And then we also had the analysis section, where we're really trying to break down the problem and understand what the problem is, and to develop alternative methods to address that particular problem. We also talked a little bit again about cost, and again the primary focus here is efficiency equals cost savings equals more revenues generated. And so we looked at the older cost to fixed defects chart, which showed the cost to fixed defects at, in the design stage of about $1 per, and then as we moved on up, it went to 6.5, 15 times, and then 100 times once we get into the actual deployment stage. We also talked about a new chart, which is the cost of requirement errors, and again a very similar thing, in that if we can discover and address the errors while we're writing requirements, the cost is almost negligible. It's a dollar for a dollar. But the further on that we get through that process, again, that cost becomes exponential. All right, and again, this is a common theme that we've seen, and both of those charts were from two different sources, basically saying the same thing. Dollar-wise, they were had some variance, but again, it was an exponential increase as they go. And so the old adage is that statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics probably holds true, in that whoever wrote these, they took the data that supported their stance the best to arrive at their dollar points. But the fact that both of them show exponential growth as you go through the process, I do think holds true. All right. We talked about the ability to actually communicate with the customer, and to have that clear understanding of what it is that the customer says they want, or actually what they really need versus what they say they want. We had the cartoon graphics with the different rope swings, and how the different members of the project team saw each of those. All right, and then so again, it's when we're talking about requirements, we have to make sure that we fully understand what it is that the customer wants, and that it actually is what they need. And a lot of times the customer doesn't really understand what they need. All right, so I think that brings us back up to where we left off. The last slide that I actually discussed yesterday was this one. On Wednesday was this one, where we talked about the actual writing of good requirements. And so we'll just kind of kick up from there again, in that it's a full sentence with a subject and a predicate. We can have two different types of requirements, as in mandatory or desirable. All right, mandatory has specific wording to it, shall and must. All right, and then desirable or optional requirements, those things that well, it's not a deal breaker if it doesn't do this, but it'd be nice if it did. All right, and so um, we have those. All right, and then that last bullet again really kind of sums up what we talked about for the better part of the lecture on Wednesday, is that we have clear, unambiguous, and not confusing. All right, and again we went through the picture a dog in your mind scenario and discussed the implications of that, where somebody might be thinking of a Dachshund, somebody might be thinking of a German Shepherd, and then somebody who's deathly afraid of dogs might just be picturing an exaggerated dog that has a huge head with huge teeth and snarling and growling and so forth and so on. All right. So the key to this whole thing is, again, understanding what it is that the customer is asking for and what they really need, and then putting this all down so that there's little to no interpretation. All right, so because as we pass this through to members of our team, again, that same scenario can play out in that we write something, we think that we're being exceptionally clear, and we're not. We're using verbiage like dog. All right, and so they get a different picture of the dog in their mind than what we're talking about. All right, so we want to try to flesh this out in as clear of terms as possible. All right, and it talks about using the customer's terms and jargon. And again, because in any industry that you're going to be in, there is going to be technical terms and jargon associated with what they do. It's just a fact of life. I can't think of any that there isn't some type of jargon associated with it, and some are worse than others. I spent a large portion of my life in the military, and there's an acronym and jargon for every single thing in the world in the military. All right, and it's really confusing to people who haven't been in the military. All right, but so we want to try to express what the customer is looking for, clear, concise statements. We want to try to use the customer's terminology, all right, because who's going to actually approve this? The customer. All right, here we go. Okay, so now we're moving on. And so I went ahead and flipped to the SMART requirements yesterday, but I stopped my lecture right there. And so here's where we'll pick up in 7 minutes in. So you got a good review. And you all probably have heard this SMART thing before: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. All right, and there are different, slightly different variations of this that are in use, and they're all more or less the same. But there's some minor, subtle differences in what they might use for some of the words for the acronym. But again, it's mostly the same thing, the same concept. All right. And so specific, and again, we want to be very specific. We don't want to leave this open to interpretation. All right, we want to clearly outline what that is. And as we continue on, you're going to see how we really delineate that. And so we're making specific calls for what it is that we want or that we need. All right, measurable. And again, going back to Crosby's 4 absolutes of quality, the very first one is the definition of quality as conformance to requirements and not goodness. All right, and so they have to be measurable. We have to be able to do something to measure the output to see that did we actually meet our requirements. All right, and in the lecture, I think yesterday we talked about those can be word just flew away. I hate when that happens. It'll come back to me here. But it shouldn't be based on feelings. All right, though it can be. All right, but we want to have things that are directly measurable. All right, and attainable, achievable, actionable, appropriate. All right, and again, there was a blurb in the lecture yesterday that talked about if they can't be met, then we have to refine the requirement. All right, and so if it's not something that is attainable, and let me talk a little bit about that. When I say attainable, what does that mean? Well, it means that we can do it with the resources that the customer is willing to spend on this. All right. And so just about anything is possible if you have enough time, money, and resources to throw at it. All right. But, when a customer comes in and they say, hey, I have this problem I need you to solve, there's a set pool of money that they're setting aside to address this. Okay. You don't get carte blanche just to do whatever, usually. All right. So that attainable thing is that, with the resources that have been allocated to this, are we going to be able to do this? All right. Realistic. All right. And again, really the attainable and realistic are very, very closely related in that, is it something that we realistically can do? And so, if they want a full-blown prototype of something in a week, all right, is that realistic? Well, I don't know. It depends on how complex it is. All right. And again, how much resources are they willing to throw at this? And then time bound. All right. So, we want to put, and this goes back to the whole measurable thing, that we want to have specific set points of time, where we're tracking this thing. All right, and again, attainable and realistic also kind of tie into that as well, in that, we want to have a timeline-based thing that we do. Also, when we're doing some requirements, they will be time-based, because time is measurable. All right. All right, I think I beat that horse to death. Let's move on to the next. Let's see here. All right, so next we're going to talk a little bit about how we write requirements. And so requirements are hierarchical. All right, and so what we're looking at is just a way of formatting a requirement. And so the major requirement is up top with the 1.0. All right, and then as we step down within that, and we've talked about a little bit about goodness gracious, my mind is just losing it this morning. We have talked about specific actions, and then there are also actions that are called implied actions. All right, and so these can fall in that. And so the requirement, number one requirement for a student might be, and turns in homework in a timely manner. Okay, or by the due date, which would be whatever date and time. All right. And then each requirement shall be numbered. All right, and so a sub of that might be in that the homework is turned in a PDF format, and that further within that PDF format, we're going to use this type of, we'll use APA style formatting, and so forth and so on. All right, and so what you see is that a major requirement, or even a system requirement, is going to be these overarching headers, the 1.0, and then for each supporting requirement below that, be a 1.1 or a 1.2 or 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, and then supporting requirements underneath that are the 1.1.1 and the 1.1.2, and so this is all very hierarchical. And again, this is really, really straight to the point. And so, this is how we break it down to make sure that we're doing the things that we need to do. And so here we have our explicit tasks and our implied tasks, like I just talked about. Sadly, my mind flew away on me as I was trying to think of implied tasks. All right. So, an explicit task would be turn in your homework. And then, so what does that mean? So the explicit task is to turn in your homework, which would mean, so what are implied tasks below that? The type of document that it's submitted in. And then what are all the actions that are required to do that? Okay, those are what we're looking at as implied tasks. So, you think, oh, turn in your homework, that's just a baseline task. No, not at all, because if we're turning in homework electronically, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So if I required that your homework be submitted as a PDF, all right, so one of the steps would be the final step before submission would be to convert it to a PDF, and then you would actually have to log into Moodle, and then you would have to go to that homework assignment, and then you would have to identify the file, and then you would have to press upload, and then you would have to press save. All right, and so you see that even for something as simple as turn in your homework, there are a whole lot of implied tasks that go along with that. And when you really start thinking about what we ask people to do, and we look at all the subtasks or the implied tasks that fall within that, there's a lot. I mean, even for something really simple, there are a lot of implied tasks that we just assume they're going to do in order to accomplish the overarching task. Wow. I think maybe I need to go home. All right. All right, here's another example of this, a little more generic. So I think this is a really good illustration of that breaking down of what the requirements are. And so the overarching requirement would be that the system shall enable the customer to pay electronically. All right. Well, again, so what does that really mean? All right. And so the system shall, so sub requirements under that, the system shall enable the customer to pay with MasterCard, to pay with Visa, to pay with Discover Card, with a debit card, with a gift card, with PayPal, with Apple Pay. And so, I mean, you see, this breaks it down, and so we're really getting to the nitty-gritty of what it is that we want it to do. And I think this is a really good illustration of how that works. All right. So again, these are all SMART requirements: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based, or time-based. Use hierarchy, numbered, and it's focused on the system. All right. And so you might be asking, well, why do we have all these numbers? Why bother? Well, couldn't I just use headings? You could, but when we are solving these requirements, right, we want to be able to attach the function to that. All right. So this particular function solves system requirements 1.1 and 1.2 and 1.3 and 1.4. Okay, and so that way we had that mapping going on before, right, where we had the requirements first and the functions that answered those, right? So same thing. All right, this allows us to do that in a very organized and clear manner to make sure that we are addressing all of the requirements. All right. So I'll give you just a moment to read through all of that. I guess I'll read it myself, so I'll give you plenty of time. Give about another minute for you to finish reading that. While you're reading this, what I'd like you to think about is, how would we translate this into formal requirements? What are the major requirements, right? Because this is really typical of a scope of work that you might get. In that, they're writing out this document for you to address what they need, right? And so this is really common because the customer already has typically a set system in place, and they're wanting you to develop something to help augment that system, to make it more efficient, more reliable, so forth and so on. And so this is kind of what we'll get. And I see that I again have, there we go, sorry, I don't understand why that keeps cutting stuff off, but so again, this is really a good example of what you might get as a scope of work. And so we want to be able to translate this document into a formalized requirements using the appropriate structure and numbering and so forth. All right, and so okay, let's go down here to the next one. Where did it go? All right. Now this isn't necessarily the end all do all be all. All right, but with what they've given you, this really does break it down into how it needs to be. All right, and so the two major headings are what? We have the new vehicle management, and then we have the used vehicle management. And there are different requirements within each one of those. All right, and everything that's on here is delineated. Oh, it's not delineated, but it's set forth in the previous slide there. So the new vehicle management 1.1, the system shall allow sales personnel to view the list of new vehicles in inventory when requested. All right, and then so if it's not there, then we need to be able to do what? We need to be able to look at the overall system for that manufacturer to say, hey, is there another one there and can we order it? All right, and then so then if we do order a system, right, we have a step down 1.2.1, the system shall automatically copy all of that data for that particular vehicle into our inventory, into our database, which we're going to be talking about in probably next week. Actually, it will be next week. We'll be talking about database management. All right. So then the used vehicle management, and so there are a lot more tasks or requirements within that used vehicle management system, right? And so again, here we go. To view a list of the used vehicles in, and then we're going to be adding, as we have somebody who buys a new vehicle, right? Most of the time they're going to be trading something in, so we're going to have to add that to our system. All right, and then there we go. The subset below that, 2.2.11, the system shall check the manufacturer's database to see if the used vehicle's data is available from the manufacturer when an event is entered. All right, again, so it's pulling data from the manufacturer, all right, so that we get good stuff. All right, and again, then we just have sub requirements below that. All right, and all those 2.2.11 through 2.2.112. All right. Actually, there's a formatting error. 2.2.1.1.1 is actually a subset of 2.2.11, so that actually should be tabbed over a space, and that's my error. All right. So hopefully this is kind of solidifying for you in that this is a deliberate process, and we are being deliberate in what we do. And see if I can. All right, there we go. Okay, so all right, I got the cart before the horse, it looks like. All right, so I probably should have slipped these in first. All right, because this is how you actually start to break this down. All right, so we're going to identify the overarching requirements first, those system level requirements, and then we're going to start breaking it down. And so we're pulling stuff out of that initial scope of work document, and then we're just adding it in here. All right, and so what this is going to show, next couple of slides are going to show, is that we write these requirements in, and then there's more information that we need to gather. All right, so this is kind of the footprint, the template to start writing it. All right, and so here we go. Again, we're in that used vehicle system. All right, and so the system shall include the following data for each vehicle in the used vehicle. Well, you know what? Each one of these is going to be a subset of this 2.1.1. All right, as we saw in that previous slide. All right. So again, this is just kind of a template. We're taking stuff out of that scope of work document, and we're putting it into a requirements document, and we're starting to flesh that out, and we're starting to build it. And this can be a very long and rigorous process as we pull information out, and then we're looking for those explicit tasks. We're also looking for those implied tasks, because all those have to show up here. All the tasks, all the supporting requirements, supporting tasks, whatever, they all have to be documented in here. Otherwise, you can't measure it. Okay, if it's not listed in here, then you can't measure it, period. All right. So this is a first swipe at a final grade entry requirements document. All right. The system shall enable professors to enter a final letter grade at the end of the semester. The system shall ensure professors enter one of the following values as a final grade. All right. So that would be a list. The system shall visually notify professors when all grades have been entered for a course. Enter a last date course attended if the grade entered is F. All right. Well, that sounds pretty good, right? Like, oh yeah, that's good. Well, let's see. Oh, what happened? I'm missing a slide. I'm sorry. Dad burn it. Yeah, okay. All right. Disregard that, because I don't know where that next slide went. Oh, doggone it. All right. Pop machine payment. That's obviously written by somebody here in East Central Indiana. Where I grew up, it was a Coke machine, or a soda machine, not a pop machine. That was one of the hardest things to get used to you want to pop? All right. All right, so here we go. Pop machine payment. Customer can pay with physical currency. The system shall accept coins or dollars. Customers can pay with credit cards and debit cards. Customers can pay with a student ID when the card has enough currency credit. All right. Well, that sounds like, hey, this is a pretty good swag at it. But that can absolutely be fine-tuned. And here we go. So the system shall allow a customer to pay with physical currency at the time. So we broke that down, right? So we had physical currency, and then down below that they can pay with a student ID, or they can pay with credit cards and coins and dollars. Okay, so here they had things that are sub-requirements, right? So it's physical currency. This system shall accept coins or dollars is actually a sub-requirement of this. Customers can pay with credit cards and debit cards. That's actually a totally different requirement, right? So this would actually come on out over to the left. And then customers can pay with a student ID. That could be written as its own separate requirement, and it probably should be, because there will be a separate system within that, though it could be lumped in with the customers can pay with credit cards and debit cards. Depending upon, you could do that, and it wouldn't necessarily be wrong. All right, so here we go. Now, this is when we're starting to really flesh this out, okay? So So we got our 1.0 is the physical currency. Our 2.0, the system shall allow a customer to pay with electronic payment. And so here they actually did leave it in with that electronic payment. And again, if I were writing this, this would actually be, what the heck? They got a 3.3. Oh my goodness, I have to go through these slides and fix all this stuff. So this 3.3 actually should be a 3.0 over here and be its own. All right, and the reason I would do that is that there's a separate system that goes in with this, right? And so it's different than the debit card one. All right, now also keep in mind that with each one of these MasterCard, Visa, debit card, all right, these are our sub requirements of this. And so to pay with a credit card, and then down below that it should be MasterCard, Visa, Discover, American Express, blah, 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 blah. There should be sub requirements for each one of those. All right, here we go. Yeah, whatever. So yeah, that better, but still not complete. And again, this is a process. We're going to cycle through this multiple times, thinking about that whole iterative design process. We are going to cycle through this multiple times to make sure that we get it right. And then multiple people should be looking at this, because I know I've been guilty of this when I'm writing something like this, is that I write something and I see it as differently than what I actually wrote it as. All right, and I'm sure that we've all been guilty of that at some point in time. So it's really good to have somebody else review this to be like, hey, yeah, is this really what you meant to say? Because a lot of times it's really not. All right, go on. Thermostat management app. This is they built this to go with that solar heating array lecture that I did. Shoot, I don't even know, months ago. We don't really need to do that. All right, so specifications. These are the things that actually answer those requirements. Specifications is something that your component, sub-component, your sub-assembly, or your assembly actually does. Specifications. All right, there are many levels of these. All right, we have top-level requirements, so we have top-level specifications. With just about anything that we do these days, you're going to have some type of software system driving it. I mean, that's just a fact of life in today's world. All right, so important to note that is a separate specification. All right, because we're going to have hardware specifications, we'll also have software specifications, and the software specification will be set up much the same way. All right. So you'll have an overarching software specification, and then you'll have that broken down by subcomponent all the way down to component level. All right. Just a reiteration of what I've been saying all along. Who is the customer? Who's the bill payer? Who's the user? Other team members, and the boss. All right. So again, this is kind of an important thing, is that the person who's bringing you the project is not necessarily the customer. They are the customer's representative. And so by understanding who is playing the critical roles in this will help us more accurately address what their needs actually are, so that we can create a system with the specifications to meet their needs, right? Okay, so who's paying the bills? Who's actually going to be using this? And I talked about this when I talked about doing the actual beta testing, which is we have technical people playing with something, and then when we do a limited amount of product that goes out to the consumers, those consumers are going to be of a demographic of our average user, right? Because those are the people, they're non-technical typically, and they're going to be the ones who are trying to use this, whatever it is that we develop, for what its intended purpose is, right? And so these are going to be people that are going to do things that we didn't think about, and are going to find errors. Okay, they're going to be the ones who break it. So we need to know who that actual end user group is, what they do, and what it is that they will be trying to do. All right. We also need to know everybody who's involved within that process and what their role is, and then we also need to know, who's the boss, who's the one who has the last say on this. All right. That will help us make sure that we get an accurate representation. All right. Let's see. All right. So then we're going to take that again. They're going to give us a scope of work, and then we're going to strip that scope of work out and create our requirements, our list of requirements, our hierarchy of requirements, and then we're going to start developing the specifications, right? All right, so another far side. All right. This can be very true. All right. So what we're saying, a lot of times, people are very selective in what they hear. All right, and we are too, and so when a customer's talking to us, we tend to fixate on things that we recognize, and so we might miss a lot of things that weren't in our vocabulary to speak with. All right. All right, just a further reiteration, mandatory or desirable, the verbiage for that, shall and must, should, may. All right. Another far side. All right, so this will be a homework assignment. I will put it up on Moodle, and today's Friday. I'll make it due sometime next. I'll probably put this on either later today or Monday, and I'll make it due next Friday. All right. So we had the cell phone requirements document that you all wrote a week ago, I think. And so now we're going to rewrite it, and we're going to use the proper format. And I think what you'll find is that most likely you're going to have to break down your requirements into the little bite-sized bits, just like we've done. So anyhow, we're closing on our 40 minutes of lecture, and so I think that's pretty much it for the day. I hope that everyone has a blessed weekend. Anyhow, Doc D out.